So it is my pleasure to introduce Creighton Randall, who's here with us today. Creighton is the CEO of the Mobility Development Group, which is a company that he launched after doing a whole bunch of other things. Maybe he'll share with us, but he launched this company in 2018. Mobility development supports the development of community-controlled mobility programs, so electric car share, bike share, volunteer transportation networks across the US, maybe other kinds of programs. We can hear more about that as well. Creighton has worked directly on sort of all of these programs. Closer to home, one of you commented on our book discussion about wanting to know more about what's going on the West Coast. So Creighton does, not from the West Coast, but he knows a lot about West Coast programs. Since 2015, he's been providing technical support to the LA Department of Transportation, LA DOT, for their Blue LA program, which is, as many of you might already know, a subsidized electric car share program, largely in central Los Angeles, a little bit east, expectations to expand southward in south sort of LA, hopefully. And as part of this program, Creighton has been working with community-based organizations in terms of outreach and site selection and thinking about, we had a conversation about that this morning, kind of the long-term development of the programs, and hoping he'll talk a little bit about that. So Creighton is here to talk about all things car share, electric car share, and equity. And it fits in, for those of you who are in my class, fits into our sort of module talking about cars and automobility. And then, as I mentioned to you all, and also to Creighton, that I'm hoping toward the end of the session, we can discuss together whether in some contexts, some neighborhoods, some places, that reliable vehicle access rather than actual ownership can sufficiently narrow the accessibility gaps that we see between those who do and don't have automobiles. So we can hopefully return to that toward the end. So let's welcome Creighton. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you. And yeah, so I think we've got some time here. I'd like to talk about a couple things. So if I can make this work correctly. There we go. All right. So I can tell you a little bit about us at Mobility Development. I'm going to focus on universal basic mobility. I think kind of just test that definition and talk about that more broadly before drilling down on the car side of things, because there's my understanding of the syllabus is you spend a lot of time on cars, you move into other forms of transportation, but start with cars. And so before we get started, I want to recommend two books. Just looking at the syllabus. One is called Cars and Jails, just came out like a year ago. These are going to be, unfortunately, for whoever's focused on the West Coast, these are both actually East Coast kind of oriented. So Cars and Jails follows the intersection between automobiles and prisons and sort of carceral state. So how does having a car get you back into society, but also how can a car, through enforcement and ticketing and fines and fees, kind of pull you back into the prison system? Not an urban planning book, but connects you to the folks that are impacted by the work that you're going to be doing. It's a very heavy book, but it's short. I would highly recommend it. And making equity planning work. This was the most influential book for me as a aspiring urban planner. Also, again, not West Coast. This book follows planner Norm Krumholtz out of Cleveland. But really gets at the heart of the kind of combination between policy and practice and how those two sort of intersect. And I think that's going to be hopefully the theme of what I'm going to introduce here. So a little bit about us. Mobility Development is a hybrid organization. So we are a private company doing work almost exclusively focused on marginalized communities, the Spanish communities, and about 20% of our work is in the planning world. So Blue LA is a good example. Fundraising, grant writing, initial project design, pulling teams together. As Abby mentioned, outreach, community engagement, a lot of negotiation on the part of the city or cities, in other cases, with an operator, and then evaluating the work. But about 80% of our work is in operation. So in mostly in other parts of the country, we provide the kind of backbone for some of these car share systems in particular. We do a little bit of work in bike share, but most of our work is, kind of providing almost the back office infrastructure to allow communities that aren't LA to make use of these car share systems. And I'll talk a little bit about that later. In general, we see that, so this is a photo from Grand Rapids, Michigan. A lot of our work is centered on small and mid-sized cities where it's easier to knit these things together. This is Drive CDTA in Albany, right? So CDTA is the transit authority. It's a lot easier in Albany, New York, to make the case that there's some sort of universal systems, there's some sort of joint system. It's smaller bureaucracies, easier to make connections between programs, frankly, So these two cities in particular, we're hoping we'll see the Dash downtown area shuttle branded exactly the same as the Carshare program, right? Really just sort of from the user standpoint, knitting these programs together is just easier for us to make progress in a Stockton or an Albany or a Grand Rapids, Michigan. So universal basic mobility. Can somebody give me a definition? You've got the biggest UBM pilot in the country happening right here. What does universal basic mobility mean? Anybody?
Anybody should have the means to travel anywhere, anytime.
Anywhere, anytime, they should have the means to do it. Should be able to do it. Okay. What else? Anybody else? Different definitions.
Don't worry so much about LA's UBM program, which we'll talk about, but when you think about the concept of universal basic mobility, what comes to mind for you?
I think just having the quick stress-free experience of getting to essential places like the pharmacy or school.
Just ease of access, sort of, shouldn't be a pain in the butt. Anybody else? So there is no definition, right? We're making it up. A lot of stuff in shared mobility has been made up in the last 10 years. A lot of that's been driven by just the nature of the business. We've seen a lot of investment from venture capital companies, and that's influenced the way things get pitched, the way things get branded. On the opposite side, you have cities through organizations like, say, NACTO, right, that have also driven their own vernacular, their own language. Vision Zero, right? Universal basic mobility, mobility hubs. These are terms that, as much as they come from this sort of nascent private sector, they also come from almost, you could say, activist city planners, right? So there's no definition yet, right? But that's okay. I would make the argument that there should be, and we just need to figure it out, and it's gonna take some time to do that. If we look at other analogies, we look outside of urban planning, we look outside of transportation, right? Transportation itself is a big sector of the economy. We generally have, I think, an understanding that there should be some sort of universal access. There should be, somebody should be able to go anywhere at any time, except freedom of movement, and it should not be a pain in the ass, right? Unfortunately, when we worked on this as a society for housing, for healthcare, even for education, we did it in a kind of a more formulaic way, right? So with housing, this big push post World War II. We knew we needed federal intervention. We basically created a new federal agency, and we came up with some standards pretty quickly for what is affordable housing and what's not affordable. And it's pretty easy to do, right? Shelter is in some ways more easy to just build a unit of housing than just figure out a much more complex transportation landscape. Healthcare, obviously, there's the ongoing fight, right? But we also came up with some basic systems for that: Medicaid, Medicare, the Affordable Care Act. All of these also started mostly federally, although there's some West Coast origins of that I want to talk about if we have a little bit of time. Education, I know less about, but they're the same thing, right? We have systems in place at the federal level, also coming out of World War II, that said we should have some basic access to education based on income. Money should not be a barrier to education, to higher ed. Of course, we figured out primary, secondary education a long time ago, but we figured these systems out. We haven't figured out transportation. We came up with this 80-20 split, again, sometime post World War II, that basically is almost like in my mind, kind of an admission that there should be universal basic mobility without figuring it out. So we said, we want to build all these highways. We want to have freedom of mobility, but we know everybody's not going to actually have that freedom. So we'll do this transit thing, and we'll put 20% of the federal budget into cities, into systems that make it virtually free. And so we've had this kind of uneven 80-20 split. It's really just been a political one. It's been, what can everybody in Congress agree on is a fair split? And even that's gotten kind of, the last couple of years, I think it's now like 82-18. They're chipping away a little bit at it, right? But we never have had the means to do this distribution, right? What's the quote? The future's here, it's just not evenly distributed, right? We got all these awesome things. We don't actually have systems to distribute them universally, right? And so our team thinks that clean mobility options are one way to chip away at that a little bit. But there is a question still of how do we measure it, right? And I think this is at the heart of how we apply funding, how much we go after, what the mechanisms are. So I would also open it up to the group. How would you measure universal basic mobility? How would you measure the outcomes? Give me a sort of a quantitative unit of measure for universal basic mobility.
That my 90-minute trip in a car here today could be equivalent to the 5-hour trip it was taking me to get here from UC.
So time, a person's time.
And it's spent. Time is like time is how a capitalist society measures our value. And we value transportation to be more superior than driving a single occupant car. Then why does it take me 4 to 5 hours to get here on public transit? But because I drove today, it took me it took me 2 hours actually. It said it take me 90 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting that you present this federal split, but you fail to mention that transit was built by mostly real estate developers. So it was never meant for poor people. Poor people were just meant to live in the city center until the gentry decided to return to the city center.
Yeah, just FTA sort of inherited something that was built with private money. Absolutely. How else do we measure?
They purchased it.
They purchased it. How else do we measure universal mobility? Time is one way. Trips, I would say, units of measure as trips is another way.
Maybe in a different way that we measure access to mobility. I don't know how much choice matters in terms of like being able to also like decide how you travel or like having access to like those things. Maybe.
but like a demonstration of choice. And I'm not limited to just one thing that I'm given, but I have options as a way of measuring success. Interesting. Yeah, I had thought about that. Any other units of measurement? So, for those of you that haven't seen this, you should definitely check this out. This isn't real time. This was, I think, at least maybe a week ago. Could be a little bit longer back. So LA Metro has invested in universal basic mobility. There is a decent sized grant running through Los Angeles Department of Transportation in partnership with LA Metro of this name. And it's got a bunch of components to it, right? So we're investing in, the city is investing in e-bike libraries, Carshare, active transportation investments. This is all in South LA. But there's a unifying feature, which is this basically mobility wallet. It says that participants, I think they started with 1,000 participants, will have $150 every month for 12 months. And Metro will not have any holds barred. You can't spend it on a movie ticket, but you can spend it on anything that kind of qualifies in this kind of category of transportation. And so they started to track this. We've got, I think, 5-6 months of data. And you see that most people are using that wallet, that $150 on Uber and Lyft, on individual trips that are more expensive at the kind of retail level. Now there's a couple of reasons for this. One is of course just this is what people want to have access to that maybe they haven't in the past, right? Another fact is that we don't have any bike share in South LA. We don't yet have Blue LA in South LA. It's we'll get to this later, but it's mostly focused on Central Los Angeles, right? Metrolink doesn't really serve South Los Angeles, right? So you can put all these things out here, but if you've got a dearth of options, people are going to gravitate towards this, right? But it's interesting. This is, I think, the first time that I've heard of that there's just been this kind of open-ended thing. Well, let's see what people use it for, you know? The language, the rhetoric, of course, comes from Stockton, California's experiment with universal basic income, right? You borrowing that language. So we're going to see where this thing goes, but it was a little bit of a shot in the dark. Pulling us into Carshare a little bit here briefly. For our work, it's a little bit easier to measure universal mobility. We know, and I'll come back to this slide, but we know with Carshare, we know with Carshare, our programs are pretty straightforward, right? So we've got cars, they plug into an electric charger. People use the cars for whatever they need to use the cars for, right? We see folks using cars for doctor's appointments, job interviews, probably the heaviest use is just going to the grocery store, right? I need to get a bunch of groceries. That's a pain in the butt. I'm not going to do that with a train or bus. And I might need to, stop at the laundromat on the way back, right? So we see a lot of trip chaining. We see people maximizing their time, right? 3, 4, 5 hour trips. You've got a lot of options when you've got a car, right? It could be just me going and doing a DoorDash gig, or it could be me going with a family to visit loved ones that are 4 hours away. I've got a broad range of options, right? And so we'll come back to some of what people use this for, but when we survey folks on, what does this do for you? The number one thing that we get, and Maddie's done some great work on this with Blue LA. The number one thing that we see is independence, freedom. this is what, how people respond. You know, I have the ability to do things that I didn't have the ability to do before. So we will come back to Carshare, come back to this. But a couple of examples of what this looks like. So Blue LA, right? Blue LA is, as I mentioned, took about 5 years to get going. A lot of construction, right? So about 2 years planning, 2 years of deployment of construction, all on street. So this is like the car share that we'll be talking about later in the East Coast and Midwest. Folks can use it for 5 hours. They can also use it for a 20-minute trip across town. So we have these stations in downtown central LA, some now in South LA. And they're all on street, a lot of construction over 2 years' time to get there. But now these 40 stations, you can take a car from one station to another station. You can take a car and do your grocery shopping. If the car is near your house, do your grocery shopping, come back, park the car at exactly the same location. And we see that a lot of people do that. A lot of people use this like traditional car sharing, even though it's built a little bit more like some of the more recent programs that have come out, like say Car2Go, if you're familiar with Car2Go, right? So you've got the ability to use it as one-way car share, but you're particularly for low-income households, you're kind of using it a little bit more like traditional car share, like Zipcar even does. We have 6 community-based organizations that help kind of spearhead the design and development of this program and are now engaged in outreach in phase 2, and for thinking to phase 3 about where this program goes from here as more of almost a public utility. So we're really in the middle of that expansion mode right now. And this is who uses it. So these metrics, these demographics are pretty damn similar to the sort of programs that we got started with, that I got started with 15 years ago. So this was a program called Buffalo Carshare in Buffalo, New York. So the cost of living's gone up, income's gone up since 2009, but we saw very similar numbers in terms of the representation of the membership base relative to the city as a whole. The representation of the membership base with respect to income. Most folks that use Carshare do not own cars, right? So these programs see a vehicle miles traveled increase. All electric programs means that there is a greenhouse gas reduction net, of course, but a lot of the folks that use these programs otherwise would not have access to a car. And a lot of single people use Carshare because the bigger your family gets, the more complicated things get, more you're going to need a car of your own. The program I should mention is priced at, and most of the programs we run or support are priced at about $5 an hour. Some of them that offer day rates about $40 a day. So just think about that kind of as a user, right? You get a lot accomplished if you're paying $15, $20 for a trip, and maybe getting a few things done at once in that round trip. And folks generally using the program don't really want to own a car afterwards, or decide that it would be wise to not own a car. Again, these numbers, these answers are pretty similar if you go back 15 years, pretty similar to what you see from Zipcar survey questions, right? So really these kind of answers track across income levels. Same thing with respect to likelihood to purchase an EV if somebody does decide, my life's getting more complicated. I put off purchase of the car. I used the program for 2 or 3 years. Now I've got one kid. I got another kid along the way. I gotta get a car. I'm gonna buy an EV. So again, all of our programs, all electric. Certainly, we see consistently there's likelihood that people participate in the program, they're going to buy an electric vehicle after they use it. But Evelyn's work, our work together, I think is focused a lot on user behavior, right? So this to me is really important to start to ask, not so much an open-ended question at the start of the program, how much would you like to pay for it? But a few years into the program, so this is survey work done in 2020, this is sort of at the end of phase 1 of the program. Okay. I've got a limited number of cars available. We're trying to serve as many people as possible. What are some different ways we could provide access, right? And overwhelmingly, people want to use it by the hour and be charged by the hour. So the sort of car to go model, and frankly, the way Blue LA was rolled out initially, and certainly the model of its origins in Paris, this is the way the model was presented to us back in 2017, 2018. It's like, it's like Uber, Lyft, it's like scooters, bike share, quick trip across town, pay by the minute. So I could get from one station to another station, 20 minutes for $4. That's a great deal, right? Right? Well, not so much when you actually ask the users what they want. Roughly, by the way, roughly half of our users are income qualified per guidelines similar to income qualification for subsidized electric bill or transit access or food stamps. So people really are citing a preference for being able to access something by the hour. And when we ask, how should we model it? We actually had a third of the members say that they only want pricing by the hour. They don't want all these options. They don't want folks to be able to monopolize a car for $40 a day. They don't want to pay by the minute. That's too stressful. I want to reserve by the hour. So that's Blue LA. I'm gonna talk about our other programs and then open it up to questions. But what we're seeing outside of Los Angeles, what we're seeing in the San Joaquin Valley, what we're seeing in Michigan, we just launched Michigan, it's our latest launch, is we're seeing similar pricing, but a lot more interest in longer term rental. So a lot more interested in that 35 or 40 or $45 a day. We haven't asked why, right? If I had to guess, it has a lot to do with the distance between destinations, the way that having access to a car over the course of the day frees you up from those limitations. I've got a car for 24 hours for $40. I'm going to get a couple things done that I can. One of the things that has changed in the last several years on this is a lot more DoorDash or use for gig economy work. People can't use Carshare for Uber and Lyft because they're transporting somebody else. It's too much of a liability issue for us and for others in this space, but they can use it for DoorDash. There's no liability if I'm transporting a cheeseburger, right? So we see a lot of folks using the service for gig economy work to sort of supplement what they might need the car for their own use. So I might pull a shift and I might also have access to go see my in-laws or go to the grocery store, whatever. So we see a lot in Kalamazoo's the world. We see a lot more of those type of trips. Why are we in Kalamazoo? We're in Kalamazoo because that represents most of the rest of the country, right? And we're in Michigan, we're in upstate New York because that represents most of the rest of the country. And if I back up a couple slides to just, where we're implementing this, right? Right now we've got California is putting, I think to date, they put maybe $100 million into these programs. A lot of these are car share and bike share programs. Some of them are transit, some of it's universal basic mobility, some of it's shuttle systems. A lot of it's car share and bike share. Not the rest of the country does not have these things, right? And so programs in Kalamazoo or Grand Rapids or Detroit or Buffalo, Rochester, Albany, New York are built around, frankly, a little bit more what's practical and what's commercially viable, right? So if I'm spending $18 on a Blue LA trip, right, should cost about $40 for that trip. We should be able to get about 50% cost recovery from from the user as opposed to the program itself. That's a pretty reasonable baseline. In a Rochester, Albany, New York, that might push 60-70% of the cost provided by the user, right? So as we implement these programs, we're looking at other sources of funding. So in the case of Los Angeles, you've got the Department of Water and Power, you've got a municipal utility, you can have local support for these programs, but everybody's got community development block grant programs, right? This is HUD money, this is anti-poverty money. We are seeing these kind of emerging resources. EPA, Department of Energy are increasingly focused on these more rural parts of the country, smaller cities, states that don't have their own air resources board. So we're sort of moving a lot of our work kind of frankly away from California into Michigan, into New York, into Missouri. So I just want to kind of highlight that and open up questions. I would say best way to learn more about us and these models I'm talking about is to go to our kind of user-facing website. So mglcarshare.org will show you that look and feel of how these programs go beyond just what we're seeing with Blue LA. And I did want to also just show one quick video because I think one of the things that I could talk about data all day long, right? But the storytelling of these programs is better than the data sometimes. Let's see if this will work. So this is a like library program that was, if you're going to ask me about it, I'm going to talk about funding sources and the scale of the program, number of bikes, number of users we're trying to reach. But talk to our community partners, get them in front of a camera. They're gonna tell a different story.
An electric bike like this one can cost you anywhere from 1 to 3 houses. For the last year and a half, residents here in Tacoma and in the surrounding area the Coronado grant, bringing us safe access to clean transportation to Southwest Maryland's.
At 74 years young, one of the reasons why Benito Robles may have avoided any health illness thus far is riding this bike every day. He says he has no car, and before this Electrobici e-bike program was launched by community organizations Pacoima Beautiful and People for Mobility Justice, Benito says he would have to walk or catch the bus just to get groceries or volunteer around his community. Now he uses the bike so much, he's here at the community center's bike shop 2 to 3 times a week to swap batteries. And not only does he get to keep the electric bike for 9 months at a time, it's all free. This impact is why Andres Ramirez, Executive Director of People for Mobility Justice, is leading the effort to bring a library of 150 electric bicycles here to South Los Angeles as a way to make zero emissions, clean transportation available to the communities he says are most burdened by harmful pollutants.
When we talk about mobility, it's more than just, transportation from one place to the other, but access to things you need for your life.
Things like affordable housing, quality healthcare, and access to healthy food in grocery stores like this organic produce market, the first in South LA, ran by the Paul Robeson Community Wellness Center. It also serves as a hub for community organizing. Just upstairs, Andres joined a coalition of people rooted in South LA who are joining forces to launch the e-bike pilot called Power Up South Central.
So when we're talking about updates on the bikes, however, like this is our effort to help enhance the experience for the community that lives here. We don't want it to be gentrifying too. We want it to be community oriented, community led, catered to community. So it becomes an asset, and hopefully it also becomes an economic impact.
Using this proven first of its kind model in Greater Los Angeles that Benito says he'll continue relying on day in and day out. Grateful for the mobility justice and its many ripple effects throughout his community.
Okay.
An electric bike like this one can cost you anywhere from 1 to 3.
Okay. So questions? Any topic? No holds barred. Policy practice. What's going on in Kalamazoo?